right, we'll go ahead and get started, mostly because I will preface this by saying our acceptance of this panel said that we were going from 3 to 3:30, and then in the program it says 3 to 3:50, and a couple of us actually have a conflict. So what we'll try to do is get through a lot of the content in the first 30 minutes, and then I think a couple of us can stick around for questions. But if you guys need to leave, it's fine. And I know Dr. Alvarez is going to have to take off. He's presenting another abstract. So just to give you a little bit of the lay of the land of what happens if we all just leave partway through the presentation, that's why. It's not you, it's us. So I just want to welcome everyone. I'm Sara Krzyzaniak. I am the program director at Stanford University. I have an excellent panel here, and I will have them introduce themselves in just a moment. But really this panel and the point of this presentation today is to talk about how we can work to create, and support a diverse workforce. It's something that we all are striving for. We know the importance of it. But then really that how we're doing this is sometimes where people can get caught up. And so, we've all talked together and worked together on a lot of these different opportunities, and specifically as it refers to the UIM or DEI scholarship and DEI rotations. So we'll talk about those details today, and let me turn it over to our panelists. Gannon, if you want to start, introduce yourself, and then your current role, and then also maybe how your expertise on this topic.
Sure. My name is Gannon Sungar. I'm one of the associate program directors for the residency at Denver Health. I guess my involvement in these processes is that I'm the chair of our recruitment committee, and so I'm involved pretty heavily in both our medical student clerkship and then our recruitment efforts. And we've put a lot of work in the last decade, but most notably in the last couple of years, into kind of improving the representation in our residency workforce.
Hi, I'm Vonzella Bryant. I'm at Boston Medical Center, Boston University School of Medicine. I was the former clerkship director. Now I'm director of undergraduate education, also assistant dean of student affairs, where I was the liaison to our diversity and inclusion residency committee, which we named it JEDI. I'm not sure if any of y'all have heard of JEDI. It's just kind of spread like wildfire, which stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, but such a cool Star Wars name. But mainly as far as our scholarship program, I'm overseeing that, even though now I'm not the clerkship director, but I get to be a liaison to that. And just a whole bunch of other diversity, equity, and inclusion committees that I'm a part of.
Hey everyone, Ellie Alvarez. I'm the Director of Wellbeing at Stanford Immersive Medicine. So prior to that role, I was an Associate Program Director, so I am a recovering APD. And within my role now as a Director of Wellbeing, I also co-lead our Human Potential team, which within that is where we include the DEI committee in addition to the wellness group and many other things that we're working on from a human potential perspective. I lead the recruitments for underrepresented medicine, the scholarship that we offer. And also within the School of Medicine, we have this leadership education in advancing diversity, which is a program that's a 10-month program across all GME to really focus on that inclusion and belonging for the students that we hopefully will match in our recruitment efforts.
Excellent. And then as preface, I joined Stanford 2 years ago, in the middle of the pandemic. So this last year was really the first time that we were able to offer, in my time, away rotations again. And I really wanted to learn about how we're doing it and what the process is. And I feel like every day, through the cord listserv, we're seeing more and more opportunities, more and more of rotations specifically designed for underrepresented applicants. But there's a lot of heterogeneity, and they look very different. And I wanted to really learn a little bit more about how these come together. We only have 2 slides for you today, and because we had anticipated a relatively short presentation, the details of each of our panelists' programs are here on the right. And on the left, you are welcome to submit questions through a Google Doc that I will keep an eye on, and we'll try to work those questions in as well. I also want to recognize that Simiao Lee Sauerwein at Ohio State was a part of this. She's currently on maternity leave, so she is here in spirit and helped provide some of the content. But when you are like, where's Ohio State coming from? That she was one of our original participants.
I can imagine if you're trying to click on the QR codes, there's too many links. register and then send that to yourself, text it to yourself later on so you can have access.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I just want to dive right into some of the hard questions. So let me start with the question of, how do you decide who to recruit into your clerkship? So we see this umbrella term of URM, UIM, DEI scholarships. So I'd like to hear actually from each of you, who do you recruit into your clerkship? And I will start with Gannon.
Sure. So we classify underrepresented pretty broadly, so both by race and ethnicity, but also gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status. And so we ask applicants to self-report, so they actually have to fill out kind of a supplemental short survey that augments their application through VSAS that in order to qualify for our underrepresented medicine externship, which is distinct from our other rotating course. I think we try to be as broad as possible. I think we would not exclude necessarily anyone who made a reasonable argument. Those are the kind of examples we give, but we recognize that diversity comes in all shapes and types, and so we kind of leave it up to the students, honestly, to disclose that.
And for us, actually, it's Boston, and unfortunately, we didn't really have a lot of students that, especially over the pandemic, or even the year after the pandemic. Well, it's still the pandemic, but it was really like trying to nickel and dime, trying to have any student that was interested, as far as from the underrepresented minority group or LGBTQ. And I'm just looking up in the air, just because sometimes, we even thought about we have the scholarship program, and actually went from $2,000 to $2,500 just because we had our competitor across the pond that we were competing with. But as far as this student here, it looks like he has a partner that's in Boston that he probably doesn't need all that money to, so maybe we can just pay for this and that, and maybe grab another student of interest. But as far as who we took on, it was pretty much due to the clerkship leadership that we were we'll bring this person in. And sometimes the problem was that the schedules of their medical school didn't align with our medical school, which we're not talking about problems yet, but that was one of the big problems.
We'll quickly get into all the problems you guys have experienced.
Yeah, so at Stanford, we follow the URM definition, so the stricter definition of the AAMC. We do look at all applications, so broadly speaking, whatever the diversity is based on the local population, but we do really focus on the efforts of increasing our representation. Right now, the School of Medicine still, it may be different from your schools, but for us, the things that they look at are strictly the definition for the AAMC for URM. And so for now, that's really the population, the student candidates that we offer. What's helpful in many of these is really looking at our holistic review. So we use the same rubric that we would use for accepting for our interview offers and also for the rank list. And so it makes it easier for an argument of when comparing the different applications to focus beyond just that identity. And this year, for instance, another thing that we made sure we focus on is that if you're coming from an HBCU program, we added another level of point system to make sure that we really try to capture those who are coming from an HBCU program to get access to rotate with us. That's a very tough decision.
Excellent. All right, so now I want to get into the tough questions. We all know that these are great opportunities, and since I didn't bring you guys here to just brag about how great your programs are, I want to know about the things that haven't gone well and where you've really struggled, because I think as programs either try to improve their current offerings or build one, knowing what doesn't work, as we all know, is sometimes more important than knowing what does work. So I would love to hear, what are some of the pitfalls that you have experienced as you've developed and implemented these clerkships? Gannon, I know you had a couple of points that, but I'll let everyone weigh in. You can start.
Yeah, I seem to keep going first. I think we've had several. So our externship, this will be its 10th year. So we've had a lot of iterations and a lot of changes. I think the one that comes to mind most prominently is kind of for probably in the realm of kind of the minority tax, which is that we brought these underrepresented rotators out and we wanted to create a unique experience for them, but they also rotated in our emergency department and were getting a SLO that was going to be very important to them in terms of their residency application process. And we have gone through various different iterations where we asked a lot of them during that month. And even had years where we decreased their clinical shifts so that they would have more opportunity to participate in research or to be involved in community engagement, which meant that each individual shift was then that much more concentrated and important for their the generation of their SLO. And so I honestly think we did a lot of harm in kind of creating what is already a really stressful month for any away rotator, and then adding all of these extra things, which we thought was to kind of highlight the work we were doing to engage in mentors who were working in the space. There was a lot of opportunity for the rotators to choose what they wanted to do, but still they had this kind of extra homework that was different from what our other away rotators were doing, and I think probably A, made the month really hard, and B, potentially diminish their ability to perform clinically.
Even though I thought that was a great idea, because I didn't even think of doing anything like that as far as having a research opportunities or having different opportunities. So I just wanted to point out that I thought that was an interesting idea, just because studies have shown that if you have underrepresented medicine students have good mentorship, that'll attract a student more to a program. So he goes, no, that wasn't a bad idea, but realizing it. Yeah. But as far as our program, I mean, I know you don't want us to highlight all the positives, but I mean, I think that just our statement of making diversity a priority in our department was just was so key. But then we had a coordinator during the pandemic that got sick, and then the messaging out. My problem was the messaging out that we have this great program. The website, we had to work on our website to get that to get out there. I don't know. So those were the problems that we had. But once the students were there in our program, they kind of mixed with all the other students and with the residents. And I kind of wish that there were more opportunities for them to see Boston, even though I do feel like they did see Boston with the residents whenever they had late night hangouts. But our biggest problem was that our messaging out and not having a coordinator that was totally reliable over the last couple of years.
I will share, I've seen several of these and experienced several of these as well. When we first started the SCORE program in our department, so SCORE program is a scholarship for the entire School of Medicine, but there's pediatrics. The pediatrics always do something really well, and so we followed the pediatrics. And the first time we did a SCORE program, I remember, and this is not really, well, I'm calling it up because it is a true example of bias, in fact, even bordering racism. Faculty would come in, it's like, what happened? Did we change a rubric for getting students? And having that conversation 5 years ago to the conversations now where people are a lot more, hey, what else can we do to increase inclusion and belonging for the students when they get here? Took a while, took a lot of work. It took us 5 years to really get there. And part of that was seeing faculty who are also underrepresented in medicine. And so it really took a lot of effort, and I commend our chair for really being aggressive with hiring underrepresented faculty. Because at that point, 5 years ago, it was one of those did you really just ask me that question kind of conversation? And then having more of these uncomfortable conversation allowed us to figure out a better plan. So now it's even the opposite. Our chair is, we have one student per month, for instance, as funding, so for 5 months. And now we're adding 2 more spots that may not be through the SCORE program, but we'll pay for them through our own budget. So it's a big change, but it took a while to get there.
Ellie, if you want to hang on, because I know you have to leave in the near
Sure.
future, I would love to have you answer then the next question, which is some challenges sort of along those same lines that you might have experienced in the leadership of the program, and how you kind of align with all of the different players, both, you were in this role as APD and now you're in this role as external to the program leadership. So how do you balance some of those challenges that you faced in the leadership?
Yeah, because I stepped down as APD, I no longer have access to the latest and greatest rubric for screening. And so finding that out and making sure that I still use the same thing, or at least closer to what they're going to be using it, in the PD group, I think is important. Asking like somebody from the PD group to join in the screening process is helpful, because then it kind of spreads the idea that it's not just one person making the decision. I learned that earlier on when at the very first year of the SCORE program, people were criticizing not so much the program itself, but they were criticizing the level of the students that would come with us. And we know there's a reason why some students would not do so well in a certain environment. And part of that is because of the biases that people have. Part of that are also the systemic problems that's preventing them from even getting access to the right mentorship earlier on. So I can tell you, so that's why for me, I'm very proud to say that for this year, for instance, we're focusing on HBCU programs, because 5 years ago, that was like a very tough decision, because by the time the student get to us, right, it's actually very different. The caliber is very different compared to somebody who's been exposed to emergency medicine since MS1. And so how do you then try to catch up within 1 month? And one of the solutions that I've like kind of worked with is like, I am their mentor for the year, or it goes beyond that, but like for the whole year. So when they get interviewed, we would try to create like meetings so that we can do practice interviews, and if they need a pep talk, I'm good at that. I'll give them a pep talk before their interview, right? But that was one way to let them know that there's somebody who actually cares about them beyond just getting them to visit with us. I will also tell you, this is a very expensive endeavor. So specifically, we're talking about like close to $5,000 per person that we would fund. And for the first 4 years of this, we got zero students that we gave scholarships came to our program. Because those are if we're truly being honest here, we're screening for the cream of the crop, which means that the rest of the country is screening for the same groups of people. And then they go somewhere else, and for whatever reasons they have, and then every year I have to justify to my vice chair and my chair, like, hey, can we do more of this, right? And so again, I commend like my chair for supporting and adding more, even though she was not seeing like the numbers up until like this year.
$5,000 a student?
Well, it's more than that. That's like
Okay. All right. So I'm in the middle. Okay, cool. And I want to give you props for the HBCU, since I went to Xavier for undergraduate, so I appreciate that as well. But
Yeah, leadership challenges. I do have a prompt for finances, so we could talk about that, because like that is also the elephant in the corner of the room, right? It's like, how do you fund these? But any other leadership challenges that you will want to share?
to tell you the truth, I mean, even though I know I do have leadership in the room, but I don't know, and maybe I'm Pollyannish, but I really didn't feel like I had great leadership challenges at
Great.
Boston Medical Center, so I'm sorry.
No,
I'm
that's okay. No
Pollyannish.
problems is okay. No. Yes. Any, do you want to contribute or?
No, I would just probably echo what Ellie said. I think alignment is so important, right? And so often in these departments, the clerkship director and the residency program leadership are, touch each other but are distinct. And so similarly, we had very low yield, still have had low yield overall, which I don't think is the only marker of success of these programs. But I think a huge part of that was we weren't doing what you all did, which was using the same rubric to select your students, to select your residents, so that you knew people would be well regarded when it came to resident selection. And I think similarly, those were lessons learned and felt really clumsy, and then was hard to defend when we paid for people and then didn't even rank them competitively.
If I may add, The other challenge that brought up is the evaluations, right? And so at the end of the year, when you're looking through your ESLOs and you're noticing like certain people tend to have lower grades, we had to really train the faculty that we're evaluating to make sure that they're aware that this is happening. And so what we did, this is like maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, we had a separate person that would read all of the ESLO before we send them out to make sure there's like biasing languages are like scratched out. And again, that's intentional work, and it takes a while for that to eventually take effect. But those are the few things that we tried to do to standardize those letters.
And I'll just add, and I'll take your question, from the alignment standpoint, Ellie and I have had to work this year, especially because he's outside of our program leadership. So, right, how do you work together if it's not coming from within your program leadership, so that program leadership is still involved? I mean, Ellie is like the ultimate hype man and like is passionate about this. It is great. But from a program director standpoint, I also didn't want the optics to be like we've outsourced our DI recruitment to the one person, who's like great at it, but that we weren't involved. So really trying to find the way while still avoiding what Gannon talked about, which is like adding a bunch of extra meetings. Like you get to meet with me and you get to meet with LA and you get to meet with your like SCORE people and all of these extra things that get added. Ellie, I know you can just pop out whenever. let me take your question and then I have a segue from.
I just wanted to, if you guys could really like expand to that aspect of the next level about the yield. I think that's a problem for most institutions, right? About the people you have rotate through and then actually decide to match at your institutions. So if you don't mind sharing, whether it's the aspect of how are you actually ranking them as a program, and then actually how are those people who then not matching with your program, if you do reach out to them, why are they not matching with your program? Because I think that's like to me that's the most concerning thing even about my program is about we've had multiple people come through and then like they're not matching. To me that's the biggest red flag that there is. So if you've had any thought about that from like a leadership level, like those internal conversations that you wouldn't mind sharing in a public setting.
I guess I can start because I have the microphone. Those are tough things to do. I reach out to them, but also again, especially now that I'm in the role that I'm not part of the PD leadership, I can have more honest conversations, which means that I'm there to there's two things. There is the mission of increasing representation within Stanford, but there's also the mission of just increasing representation in emergency medicine. And so for me, especially now in my role, I truly believe that if I focus on the latter, leadership in emergency medicine, then they can hopefully remember that, hey, there's this dude at Stanford that maybe it's not for the residency, but for fellowship, they'll come back, or maybe for faculty position. But that takes time, and that's what I tell my chair, that this is why we're doing it, so that we can continue to get funding. But numbers are very, very tough.
And what I noticed, like when we first started doing the scholarship program, like we said, like a quote unquote caliber of some of the underrepresented medicine students that we brought in, just didn't seem as good. But then it still sparked a little bit of a fire as far as like in the community of what medical students, they talk to each other, residents talk to each other about Boston Medical Center, how we're so supportive and so inviting. And then like a couple of years later, we just had a lot of like high caliber underrepresented medicine students. I think the other important thing is that when we do our rank day lists, it's a team effort, and actually we have residents and faculty and everyone involved in the rank day, which is important as far as diversity, as far as conversational thought of the different students. I mean, like, well, these were the attributes that were great. I mean, I know the step score wasn't that great, but I think that having that conversation really helped to improve the numbers of underrepresented medicine students up on our list. So the student may have started not at the bottom, but halfway at the bottom, but then we're able to push them up, and it was very fruitful a couple of years ago. Even though I do have to admit, the last 2 years we didn't do that great as far as actually our underrepresented medicine matching, but still got some stellar residents, and the fire is still there for us to improve recruitment.
Just briefly, so every year we also just track how many underrepresented medicine apply to us, how many of those students we offer the interview, how many of those we put in the rank list high enough, and then eventually matching with us, and we give that report back to our vice chair of education, the chair, so that we know we're all accountable. The DEI committee, so people see it. So then it's more than just one person's work to say, hey, how come this is not working? Well, all of us have been a part of the reason why we have not been successful, or you can look at it, here's an opportunity for us to maybe increase inclusion for when they do visit with us.
So right, data is always important.
Oh, I was just going to touch on your question real quick. I was looking at our data, and I will bare my soul, but we've been doing this for 9 years. We've had 65 rotators. We've matched 4 of them. Only about 25% have been ranked competitively, ultimately on our list. That number went up to about 85% for the last 2 years. So even before that, it was worse than that, right, if we do the math. And I think a lot of that was what we talked about earlier, that we were not well aligned in terms of how we were valuing underrepresented applicants in our residency selection process. That change has improved that. But still that yield is really low, and when you do the math, we only offer a $1,500 scholarship, so our math doesn't look quite as bad as theirs. But that gets hard to justify, and I think that's where you have to have these conversations about momentum. This is the long game, about the commitment to increasing representation in our specialty, not necessarily in our departments and institutions, and what mentorship, what opportunity you can create. And then, yeah, the long game, again, is also come back for fellowship, come back for faculty. And I think, the SAEM board has 68 EM residency programs that have a DEI or underrepresented externship. Like, at this point, it's hard to go back, right? And really, this is a signpost that shows that you're committed to this work. I think those were all the reasons that I wrote down for my chair when he asked why he was paying for this.
We'll walk over there, Dr. Heron, as I mentioned something else. I will say as well that for our program, interestingly enough, we finally just matched the first of the scholars that we've given scholarship. However, the ones that did not, so if you apply to our SCORE program, you're automatically accepted to rotate with us. Those who rotate with us that did not get scholarship, we matched 2 of them already, I think 2 or 3. So definitely, that's why now we're funding, like if you're not like the top 5, if we have some money left, we'll give you some money to come with us so that you can still feel like, the idea is for them to experience what Palo Alto is like without having to worry about the money first, because once they're there, they really do feel that there's a community there.
Thank you, Ellie. So Cheryl Heron Emery, just one question. You may have touched on this, but I know you're talking internally about your respective rotations, but to what degree do you leverage, if you have them, the CDIOs of the institution writ large? Because in addition to your, students rotate, they come, they are in there, but then they're also going to other rotations and other places in the institution, right? So to what degree do you leverage the ACGME's lens around doing this and leaning on them for either financial support, whatever support they may need, visibility, to be able to bring the student in? Because we heard yesterday, or someone said, we bring students in, they get into the environment, and they're like, what the hell did I just sign up for? Not just within the residency, but within the institution. So just curious as to how you blend in the opportunities, if you have that, of the CDIO at your respective institutions. Thanks.
I can quickly answer it. I have to really run after this. This is a great question. We struggled with this at Stanford for a while. We didn't have an Office of Diversity in Medical Education. And so there's the residency program directors that would meet, and there's the undergraduate medical educators that would meet, but there's not alignment in the conversation. So a higher level than beyond the program. And so the solution was create an ODME. And so we created one last year, I believe. So we have a dean now for the Office of Diversity in Medical Education. So it's now a school-wide, so we have like second look for the entire School of Medicine. We have a lot of these events that really is trying to be as inclusive as possible. And then they get to interact with other SCORE students from other specialties rather than just within our emergency department. So it's a great question, and I think we have to leverage it more of that.
Go. But yeah, you're right, as far as it catching fire across departments, not just in the emergency department, but also across all the other departments like medicine and OB-GYN, and making it an environment where people feel supported, or students feel supported, and not and even us tackling the microaggressions thing, I mean, that's super, super important as far as creating a better learning climate. So, yeah, you have to combine all of them.
I'm the CDIO at Emory now, and we had 300 plus people come back for this virtual second look, and that was an intentional
Yes.
lens around, okay, it's not just this department, this is the institution
Exactly.
commitment, which will help, will hopefully, actually did, because we have the best, match across all specialties in
Yes.
Your Um. So there is some value in leveraging those relationships going forward.
Yes, yes, indeed.
I think similarly, we've leveraged it for second look, but I think it's a great point that doing this with your rotators when they're actually present probably holds a lot of value.
So first of all, thank you guys for talking about this issue. Ugo is uncle from Mount Sinai, and the question is, so the yield over the years, but some of us have been doing this DAI work for some years, the yield has been low. Your IMs, if anything, over since the past 20, 30 years, the actual numbers have actually gone down. And so the question is, have we thought about it as a consortium? There are 68 programs that have this underrepresented minority sort of rotations that they have. Have you guys looked to actually to analyze this, to look at this? Is there this impact that we have, and are we actually more likely to rank these patients, no, not patients, these rotators, and get them into these programs, or are we not? And we're comparing them to now programs that don't have it. Is there this sort of this impact and this benefit? And from what I'm hearing, it sounds like the impact may not necessarily be there, but maybe as an aggregator across the 68 programs, there is this intangible benefit, and this would be a great project for you guys to put together in terms of 68. Punt that one to you guys to see if there's actually this impact, because it does, we don't want to be creating programs that have no impact. And then second of all, we talk about residencies now. We're talking about residency programs that are having longitudinal tracks for residents in JEDI work or DEI work. Or is that necessarily having an impact that we're more likely to keep those residents who do the work as become junior faculty? Because that's the next step, right? And so, as we're doing all this work and we're trying to be more intentional about it, we also sometimes have to measure impact. I'm just wondering, is there any literature behind this that you guys have come across?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question, and I'm going to let both of our panelists answer also. I think the real issue that I at least see now is, given what happened with the match this year, what changes in the next 1 to 2 to 3 years can we link to changes that we've made in our recruitment strategies versus potentially the impact of changes in our specialty, the student body that's applying. I think it's going to be hard to some extent to make that side-by-side comparison. And also as things open up, right? Like, it's hard to compare that purely virtual experience to then like this hybrid experience and then whatever happens this year. Because things are changing, and we know that influences the applicant's experience with programs. And so there's all these confounders, I think, that come in that make it a little bit hard to link directly to these programs. But to your point, I think tracking that sounds fascinating. I don't know if you guys...
Yeah, I'm not aware that there's any literature. Actually, I know that there's no literature in emergency medicine. I believe there's a little bit in pediatrics, maybe. They were probably the leading edge of these rotations as a specialty. But I think it's fascinating, and I think we all had similar thoughts when we started putting this didactic together, so we'll get to work.
Yeah, and definitely I think it's important to have track of those numbers, just because even with my program, I know for a fact that we had some rotator URIM students that ended up staying in our residency program, but every now and then I would hear, that doesn't really do much to recruit. And I'm like, but it did. We were able to recruit some folks, and then again, the word of mouth to the other students who are interested in emergency medicine to come to Boston Medical Center, it spread like wildfire at one point. I do want to point out that I think because of COVID, we weren't able to have our boots on the ground game that we had before COVID. And I think that was one of the big problems that we had the last couple of years, that we weren't able to go out to these regional conferences. And actually, I was so happy that we were able to go to SMA this year and had so much enthusiasm around our booth and whatnot. I really think we're going to do great.
And I apologize. I realize I'm seeing that that link wasn't editable. So for anyone that's requested access to this question link, it's now shared with people, I believe.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences regarding this. My name is Kara Tolles. I'm the Director of Equity and Inclusion for UC Davis EM, and that title didn't exist before I was there. So a lot of this I'm kind of learning by trying and seeing what happens. So I appreciate the insights. Let's see, I guess the question is, what do you feel is the best way to recruit for these rotations?
Money, 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 money. And actually, even there was one point that we were thinking with our Jedi group council, we were thinking that maybe we can even ask alumni to donate and so that we can have a stash of money so that we can have more money to be able to give to students. But then again, being intentional and inviting, like trying to get yourself out there, changing your websites to be more diverse, having diversity statements on your website, just getting that word out there that you know that diversity matters, not because you want a brown and black person, but because it just will create a better healthcare system for our patients that we take care of.
Yeah, I think just, again, being intentional about it and being thoughtful about where you're advertising and where you're targeting. I think at Denver Health, we've had very poor success in the last several years recruiting applicants who identify as Black or African American, and so we're pushing to reach out to SNMA and HBCUs and trying to put a presence there, because that is a segment of our population and our patient population that we're failing to support with our demographics of our residency workforce.
I will say we also reached out to our past rotators who didn't match with us, but to say, applications are open, because I think, the general gestalt that we hear is that it was a positive experience. And so, we say, like, even though you didn't match with us, if you'd like to recommend this to your colleagues and your peers, please feel free to share this information because our application is now open. So if one or two of them will say, like, oh, actually I went and it was great, got to meet people, to the, what you were saying about the snowball effect and the recruitment and the word of mouth that comes from it, I think is really valuable.
And I also want to say, point out all those diversity, equity, inclusion things, or health equity projects, or things that you have in your institution. Like at Boston Medical Center, we have the violent intervention advocacy programs that really do this transformative care of patients, because that's really attractive to minority students as well too. So just really hyping that up on your websites, hyping that up when they come on during their away rotations, and I think that really makes students really want to come to your program.
Tell them where they can get their haircut and their one last.
Right? Oh, yes. And yes. Yes, and actually I'm part. Yeah, or just even having that community of minority physicians. Like I'm part of the SNMA or the NMA chapter at New England, but just having them meet other physicians in the area and all the other community centers, and how we interact with the Black Nurses Association, with the Black dentists, Black physical therapists. Yeah, there you go. But just as far as showing them that if they do come to your institution, they're going to have a big family.
All right, so I am going to slowly wrap this up. If there's more questions, please feel free to stick around, talk to our two panelists. I have to jet, but would love to, thank you for the questions and for, speaking up about your own experiences and what you've done. I think we can all, this is a great way to continue to move that bar forward and improve the experiences for our students. So thank you to our panelists. Appreciate it.